Hello, everybody. You've tuned in to EWB's August session of our Beyond Borders Impact Series. My name is Leanna San Pedro, and I'm with the team from EWB's Toronto National Office. Now, before we get started, there are a few housekeeping items for everyone in attendance. First off, today's session is scheduled for 1 hour. If you need to log off beforehand, don't worry, the session is being recorded and we'll share it with everyone after the webinar. Secondly, in the spirit of the Beyond Borders series, we do want and welcome your participation in the conversation. So even though you might be muted, please feel free to send us your comments and questions by using this Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. Several of my colleagues are on hand right now to answer your questions directly. And of course, our panelists will also be answering as many of your questions as possible at the end of the webinar. Lastly, I do need to highlight our webinar code of conduct. The Beyond Borders series of web engagements has been designed to facilitate open, thoughtful public conversation. Any form of harassment, abuse, or similar behavior discourages other attendees from openly expressing themselves, and ultimately, this does devalue the conversation as a whole. So while we welcome those who might have opposing viewpoints, abusive and aggressive tactics and language will simply not be tolerated. Unfortunately, those who violate this code of conduct will be asked to excuse themselves from the session. Finally, I am very happy to introduce Casey, my colleague and your host for today's session.
Hi, thanks for that, Leanna, and welcome everybody to the Alumni Spotlight Beyond Borders Impact session. So I'll introduce myself. I'm Casey Fairder. I've been working with EWB for about 5 or 6 years now. Currently, I'm based in Montreal, but I had been working at national office doing some of their policy and advocacy work, and generally just hoping to get the community as excited as possible about the policy that surrounds the work that we do. Luckily, our panelists today each kind of hit a different point and aspect of EWB's work. So you'll get a nice round conversation because of that. So next I'll introduce Adi, and if you want to just go over some of your experience with EWB.
Hey, welcome. I'm thrilled to be here today and with such friendly and familiar faces. I have been very fortunate to have been part of this awesome organization, and my kind of journey through EWB has gone through all sorts of aspects, starting from being a chapter member to completing a junior fellowship, to kind of working in national office to see how the organization works, to being on many, many campaigns. Definitely the policy and advocacy ones have been some of the most exciting stuff. And then being a chapter member, also being a professional chapter member. So it's kind of, I feel like I've gone through every avenue that EWB has to offer. And so I call myself a forever volunteer, because I think that's the best title I can attribute to myself.
Yeah, we'll get you a badge for that, for a volunteer.
I'll hold you to that.
And David, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'll say I'm very, very happy to be here and very excited and great to see you both. My name's David. I've been with EWB for coming on 6 years now. I joined in 2014 when I first went to the University of Toronto. I joined as a chapter member. I remember meeting EWB on my first day on campus at a clubs fair, and I've been with the club ever since. Taken on various roles within the chapter, started out in youth engagement, also did some policy and advocacy. I remember a day of action as well being a particularly fond memory within EWB. Was a chapter president as well. And then I also did a couple of fellowships with EWB. First, a junior fellowship with Kwangu Kwako in Nairobi, Kenya, which is kind of an affordable housing venture that's working to, build safe and secure concrete houses in Nairobi slums. And I most recently did a long-term fellowship in Kampala, Uganda with Viamo, which is a mobile technology company improving information delivery to people in rural areas or people who don't have access to information otherwise. And so they provide access to information to people through mobile phones of any kind. And so I was working there as a data analyst. So like Adi said, I've also kind of tried to take advantage of everything that EWB has to offer, at least as much as I can. So I've seen many, many parts of this organization. And so I'm currently, I'm actually a director on the board of directors. And so I couldn't really stay away from EWB. So that's how I'm staying involved with the organization now.
Nice. And Addie, while we're doing these intros, do you want to give us your path through EWB similarly? We'll talk about first days in a moment, but kind of where you started and how you ended up where you are.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started as a chapter member. So I was, very much just a regular volunteer that would be coming to the meetings to figure out what this space was. Initially, kind of like most people, I think it was, join a club for a nice resume add-on or something like that, or, build your portfolio kind of thing. But then I soon, slowly, actually not slowly, right away, fell in love with the space. And then I completed a junior fellowship with Mining Shared Value, and Mining Shared Value promotes local procurement in the global extractive industries. And something that really kind of hit the light bulb for me was kind of the mining industry is one of the first industries that enter, underdeveloped or developing regions. So it's a very key industry that can really start the trend in local procurement involving the communities that are actually going to be affected the most. So my work was awesome in the sense that I got to contribute to recommending foreign policy based on the evidence-based research that we conducted through Mining Shared Value. We also I got my hand at the first draft of the first ever international standard for local procurement that Mining Shared Value was putting out. Kind of just like, how we have these environmental standards that, if suddenly these top 10 companies are the top 10 spots for the best environmental companies are awarded, then 11 and 12 are trying their best to get onto that spot. So we were kind of with a similar approach trying to do this for local procurement and trying to see that how can we really find the best leverage points for these, big mining names to start really acting on their corporate social responsibility. So it was a fantastic summer. I learned so much. And I think one of the cool things about my experience with my junior fellowship was that it was my first one in a not profits sector. So I remember one of the first days in the office, I'm like, everyone's working so late. Everyone's so passionate and happy. What's going on? All my internships have been at large engineering firms where it was just you work in 9 to 5, and as a student, it was just as soon as you're done, you go, you're babied around, this and that. It was a very different experience. It took me a little bit of time to realize that this was a passion-driven place, not a profit-driven place. And what a change of world that was. And so as soon as I realized that, I call it the magic, or whatever the spark you want to call it. I think that's what's kept me tied into the charitable, the nonprofit sector. So those were my days, and just everybody that I met, that I worked with, was such a delight. And I think I've made lifelong friends every step of the way through this organization. And so after my junior fellowship, I was even more involved, and having a chance to work in national office, I got both the opportunity to see what Mining Shared Value did, and not only work with them, but I also got to see how EWB Canada worked, right? Being in the same office, I saw how the organization worked and really felt even more connected to it. And I think that has been a reason why I've stayed connected for all these years and for so long, and into the future. So after that, after school, I kind of I had a little bit of gap where I was like, I don't know, what am I supposed to do now? And then I moved back home to Calgary, and there was the Calgary professional chapter of EWB. And at that time, I only kind of knew what the student chapters were like. So as I transitioned to this professional chapter space, I absolutely loved it. And I somehow find myself to be in a leadership position with the chapter. And I'm currently leading it with a fantastic group of people. I love my EWB so much. And so the journey has been quite extraordinary, where you go from, not knowing anything about the sector even, to being so involved with the organization, to doing a fellowship with one of their ventures, to then graduating, stepping into the real world, and then stepping into a professional chapter and actually leading it. So my journey has been kind of a roller coaster, up and down, side to side, left to right, you name it, but it's been such a rewarding and extraordinary journey.
Yeah, mine was actually pretty straightforward. I started as a chapter member at Concordia, the advocacy representative there. I didn't know what that meant, but I learned pretty quickly. And then right away, I joined the distributed team. And for those that don't know, the distributed team, they're kind of like regional managers. So they're the link between national office and the chapter network. I got involved with that, and then I led that, and then I led it again, and now I'm managing the distributed team from national office and all of the execs underneath it. So that was a much clearer path, but a meaningful one by all accounts. So yeah, each of us have had a different experience. So I think, again, it'll really lend to the conversation. And it actually brings us into the first discussion point. We're going to do a little flashback, and we'll talk about what day one looked like for us with EWB, how we first came upon it, and what initially drew us to it and really made us want to dedicate our time to it. So David, why don't you start us off with this one?
Sure. I think, like I mentioned in my introduction, I found EWB on my first day of campus, but that really wasn't by accident at all. Growing up, or since I moved to Canada 10 years ago from South Africa, I knew I was interested in global development. And so when I came to university and was starting in engineering, I knew that I wanted to find a club that would allow me to explore those interests. And so the summer before starting first year, I was on the U of T website looking at all their different clubs that they had to offer. And I was scrolling through the page, and U of T has hundreds and hundreds of clubs, but somehow I managed to come across Engineers Without Borders. And so I read the description on the website, went to EWB's website, read that a little bit, and it seemed like an intriguing organization. And so my second day on campus, I found them out in the clubs fair. And I feel like if you ask everyone, and we'll see if this theory is true, if you ask everyone how they joined EWB, everyone will have one person who they can probably link to the person that kind of drew them into the organization and made them stick and stay within the organization. And so that person for me is Quinn Conlon. She was the youth engagement lead of our chapter, and she was a person who I met at the booth that day. And so we had a great conversation around kind of development and how it's how it's complex, and how simple solutions that we see in the industry historically don't necessarily work, and how EWB is different, and kind of how they approach these issues in a more complex and systematic way. And just that conversation got me, just captured me. And so went to first meeting, went to a second meeting, trying to figure out, okay, where in this organization do I fit? Because another thing that's common within EWB is that there's so much to wrap your head around. It kind of takes a little bit of a while to figure out where you might fit within the organization. And so I think just by virtue of the fact that Quinn was in youth engagement, I also landed in youth engagement. And I started out as a volunteer as well. And I think despite that first conversation, I think there's still a bit in the back of my mind that was a bit skeptical, still trying to see, is this organization really different? Do they kind of walk the walk on top of all of the kind of good rhetoric that they're speaking? But I think the more I stuck within the organization, especially my role of youth engagement, which involved, kind of teaching high school students about development and kind of picking their brains and challenging their perceptions and getting them to see it more in a more complex way. That role allowed me to kind of see, okay, this organization is really what it's about, and they do approach development in a different way from any other organization that I'd seen before.
Nice. Yeah, they're 100%. There's always that one person that really drives you. I feel like for most these days, it's Geneva at this point. But
He's a superstar.
Yeah. And how about you, Addie? What was your day one?
I also definitely have a person, and if Jenny, you're watching it, Jenny Hosland. She was the one for me. So I signed up, and I had no intention to attend. It was just, I signed up. And then I remember meeting her at Clubs Day, and then I went home, and I was literally laying in bed after a long day of like 3 classes or something. So then I get a text message, or maybe I think she called me, and she's like, hey, I remember meeting you at Clubs Fair, and you were so excited, and you said you were going to come. We're having our meeting, but I don't see you there. And I was like, God, like who cares? Like, why are you so interested, right? Like, I just signed up like a billion other people. So then I made up a lie, and I said, oh, I have a lab right now, so I can't come. And what she said next is the reason I joined EWB. And she said that, or I actually went to the meeting. She said that, oh, if that time doesn't work for you, we can actually like move the meeting so we have a time that works. And I felt so shitty. And I was like, I'm such a POS that I should be going to this meeting. And the fact that she's going, like willing to move the entire meeting for me, it meant a lot. So I said, you know what, my lab actually just got canceled. I'm gonna be there in 15 minutes. So I ran from my dorm all the way to the meeting, and I saw they were waiting for me. And so I came into this, you know, it was a weird spotlight because they're like, oh, this is the person we're waiting for, you know, what's so special about him? But Jenny kind of just took care of every single member like that, right? So it was kind of a window into the organization where I'm like, you know, you feel valued, and it's this great space. So kind of within a few meetings, I realized I started calling it EWB a brave space, because it was already a safe space, but it was a space where you could voice your unpopular opinion, you know, be contested, but in this safe and awesome manner, and you could have discussions. And I suddenly felt like I was in this space in this university that kind of this like hidden space, because everyone outside, as soon as we left that meeting room, we were normal university kids, right? We talked about assignments and normal things. We didn't talk about solving global problems. We didn't have that lens. But as soon as we were in that meeting room, we were these, you know, systems change leaders. And I found that so fascinating. And so I stayed, and I loved going to those meetings, and I loved being in those workshops. And I was just like, wow, like, you know, we're thinking so different. And then we would recruit more people, and then see how people would really, you know, love that kind of thinking. And I really saw, like, this is how leaders are born, right? This is how young people are excited about changing the world. They actually, like, you know, care about it. And this is kind of that first stepping stone to them, you know, actually leading the world someday. So that's how kind of it started. And then I remember going to my first conference, and all this time it was about 20 to 25 people. And I was like, that was the space, right? And I go to conference, and I think there was like hundreds of people, right? And I'm like, holy crap, this is scalable. This is scalable, because it was that kind of space in I think it was, forget what the hotel was, but it was just like full of people like that, right? And from executive to chapter members to anyone that came. And I was like, this kind of mindset, this kind of thinking, this kind of leadership is truly like it knows no borders, right? And so that's what really hooked me on. And I remember being in one of the workshops where I had an unpopular opinion, and everyone's like, oh yeah, and it was something about Oprah talking about compassionate listening, and it was the Dalai Lama, I think. And I put my hand up, and I was like, it's ironic because Oprah's talking about compassion listening, but I don't think she's doing it in this video. And everyone was like, oh, like, you can't say that about Oprah. But we talked about it, and I really liked that I was this newcomer, and I had this unpopular opinion. And then we talked about, you know, we spoke about compassionate listening, and we came out of it like with a new conversation, with a new direction, with new insight, rather than being like, oh no, you're wrong, you know, our one true Lord and Savior Oprah is right. And it wasn't like that. So I really like that kind of thinking. And then of course, when I went into that fellowship and I started getting to know the organization better, I realized this is what EWB is. But it all started with Jenny kind of, you know, caring enough to invest in me, and being like, hey, you need to come to this meeting. And look how much has happened since then. So that's kind of how my day one looked like. And what I also now vow to do is, whenever I see a prospective EWB or someone who's looking for it, I plan to be the Jenny in their lives and catch their lies about going to some lab, so I can bring them on and show them what a awesome world EWB is.
Yeah. My person was Stephine Voss, if you're watching. And she actually, we had gone to Uganda together to do some aid work. And it, you know, the program was what it was. It wasn't through EWB. And there were some holes in it, and we didn't love it. And when she heard about EWB's national conference happening in Montreal, she signed us up to be volunteers. And I thought, really? Like, I'm so tired. But we did it. It was intensive. And that was my day one. So I wasn't a member yet. It was really just me attending the conference as an event volunteer, not even a chapter volunteer. And I was stunned. I was just really stunned by the conversations that the community members were having. I thought, like, wow, they're doing this because they want to, not because they have an assignment on it or you know, for anything like that. And the speakers really struck me, and I saw a lot of the issues that I recognized in some of these volunteerism programs being addressed. through the speakers in the community. And I think what really got me to stick around was that that conversation is still happening, and it continues to happen, and everybody wants to have it, and our community keeps us honest. And I think that's wildly important, because this field, you know, it's constantly changing, and updates need to be made. And the fact that people they feel safe when they have this unpopular opinion and they can bring it up as the newbie. That's what got me sticking around. These conversations are important to have, and I was so impressed that so many young people were having them together in a productive way. But then, you know, twofold, I also was totally smitten with the community as soon as I met everyone. I mean, David and Addie, we've all met a handful of times, I would say, yet I would consider you two friends and confidants, certainly. And I love that, you know, some of the people I talk to most are EWBers across the nation. The community is one that really trusts each other and pushes each other to do better. So that's why I stuck around. Conference was kind of a fluke, and then it became this commitment, this 6-year commitment. So here we are. So we can actually move on to the next discussion point now, and do some reflecting on some of the work that we've all done with EWB. So of all of the advocacy campaigns and initiatives that you've been involved with EWB, so that might be Hello 2030 or Bring Canada Back, Be Adventurous, which one do you feel was the most impactful or memorable? So Addie, do you want to kick this one off?
Sure. It's hard to pick one because they're all very memorable. I think does Day of Action count as one? Or
yeah, that's
don't
like
say Day of
the
Action. I was
grand
going to say Day of
finale.
Action.
well, I like to say Day of Action because
you want to explain a little bit what Day of Action is for
absolutely.
those that don't know?
So we call it Hill Day, Day of Action. I think the unpopular one, Storm the Hill, but it's essentially leaders from coast to coast in the EWB community gather together every May or so to actually go meet with MPs one-on-one, two-on-one, to actually I don't know if lobbying is the right word, but you know, to actually consult with these MPs about requesting change in our upcoming federal budget. So there's a lot of research that goes into it. It's not just like, hey, we want this, right, or we want that. It's, you know, through evidence-based research, you know, this is what EWB has found, and this is what we're advocating for. And being from so many different constituents and being from so many different walks of life, we're really showing that, you know, Canadians care about what happens with their foreign policy, and we actually go and we go with tools, and we give these MPs, you know, letters and research and brochures and a lot of really good conversation to tell them to request to their party leader or to the Minister of International Development that, you know, we want this change and we want this reflected in the next budget. So there's 2 days of boot camp where you come in and you learn all about what you're advocating for, and you really find your passion, because it's not just, you know, we're not just pushing for an ass just like that. We're believing in it, and we really prepare. We dress up, we look sharp, and we go up on Parliament Hill and we meet with our MPs, and we have a really successful Hill Day. So that's Day of Action. Now, the reason it's one of my most memorable one is because, first of all, I didn't know you could just talk to your MPs. I didn't know that was a thing, that, you know, as a citizen, I could hold my elected officials accountable. And you know what? I think a lot of young people also don't think that. So all my experiences come from this space of skepticism and non-believing, if you will. So I went to EWB's Day of Action because it was part of my junior fellowship at that point. I was just going for a nice trip to Ottawa. I wanted to go to Parliament Hill. And then I started going to this boot camp, and I'm like, oh man, like this stuff's really like, there's actually like research, and we were just not like, this is not a fun field trip day, right? So when I actually got around to understanding that I will be in an office with a member of parliament, I kind of, you know, gulped, and I got really scared, because so far it was a fun field trip, and now things just got really real. I was paired with Haley, if you remember Haley, and she's a veteran EWB, right? So she was very experienced. So I was kind of relaxed that I was with someone who actually would know what they're doing. And I remember not sleeping that night because I was up memorizing my points. And I was like, oh my God, they're gonna be like, well, what about this? Well, what about, legislation number 36B that does this? And I'm like, I don't know, right? So I was up all night memorizing my points, finding the ways to rebut, blah, 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 blah. And I remember going to my first meeting and I forgot my ID, so I had to run back, came in halfway through. And I had these great conversations with all these MPs. And so I started to realize that you can, one, do this. And number two, I was still a little skeptical in the sense that, I thought whatever we all did was kind of just an effort. I didn't know if there would be an impact to it. I didn't know, maybe it was a bit of a facade. I don't know. So again, I do this. I have a great day. I have a great summer with EWB. I go back to school. And next year, the federal budget is announced. And I remember I was in an EWB meeting when someone, our advocacy lead, played the clip where I think it was our prime minister reading out, the organizations that helped influence the budget, as well as what the budget would include. And it included our ask. And I remember taking a moment to just stop. And I was like, holy, what I did that day, what we all did that day actually had impact. And it changed my life, really, because then I realized that every effort we make to lobby for change, to push for good legislation, to actually play the part in our political process actually has impact. It's not for show. And these elected officials actually, like our democracy actually works, where we actually can hold our elected officials accountable. And what I have to say, what I care about actually matters. And so since then, it was such a memorable experience because I went from a complete skeptic to a complete believer. And I've been to every single day of action since then because I just find it so important. And I find it's even more important that younger people play a role in it, right? They're interested and they care because not only is it's a fun and awesome experience, and not only does it increase and better our advocacy, expertise and knowledge, but it shows the people that are in office that, hey, we care and we're holding you accountable. Right. I feel like there's this bit of a stereotype that, young people don't care and young people, will never care because politics are blah, 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 this and that. But this changes that narrative. This changes that stereotype. And I think that's wonderful. So that's why it's the most memorable for me. And I hope to go to many more days of action.
Yeah, it's a really, really impactful event. 100%. I'm there with you, Addie. And what about you, David?
Well, since Addie took Day of Action, which is, I've only been to one, I think in 2018, but like Addie said, a truly transformative and impactful experience. I think what I'll say is that when I first joined EWB, I think youth engagement was the portfolio that attracted me, but the one I knew I didn't want to join was policy and advocacy. I was not a political person at all, did not really care for politics or policy or anything of the sort. And so my first real interaction with kind of EWB's policy and advocacy space was when I was chapter president. And so being a chapter president, you kind of have to oversee all activities within the chapter, including policy and advocacy. And that year, I think, was the year that we had the Be Adventurous, or EWB Adventurous campaign, which really the heart of that campaign was being creative, being adventurous. And I think the ask of us chapter members was to find creative ways to ask. I think it was MP Champagne, now Minister Champagne, to kind of take a stand for global development and for our foreign assistance budget. And I remember as a chapter, we recorded a video singing a parody to, I forget the name of the song, but it's a classic pop song, maybe Maroon 5 or Coldplay. I wouldn't be able to tell you. I could dig up the video. But we made a remix of it. We were singing, we had someone playing the guitar. It was super folksy, super wholesome video that we made. And so that kind of just got me into our advocacy work. And I started out feeling kind of a sense of what are we doing? Is this impactful? Does this really have any impact? And I think, the sense the first sense that I got of that was not only seeing our chapter do it, but kind of seeing all the videos and all the kind of art and all the kind of different things that all the chapters across the country put together, which made me stop and think, okay, there's, you know, it's not just us doing this, there's some collective action happening here, which is, you know, has the potential to be meaningful. And then I think we had a Twitter storm that day as well, where we just flooded MP Champagne's Twitter account with just
Champagne
like our
parties.
Champagne party.
Yeah, the champagne party. That's exactly what it was. And he responded to our organization as well, I think, with the tweet, which again was, you know, I figure more symbolic than anything, but again, it shows how collective action can lead to response. And then it was the summer afterwards that I participated in a day of action myself. And like, you know, Eddie spoke about it beautifully, just like how the collective action actually leads to impact. And so that is really, I think, where my head turned in terms of how I think about policy and how I think about the impact and importance of policy and advocacy. And so that led me then to the next year, as unlikely it might have seemed at the beginning, to take on the role of policy and advocacy lead. And that year, I think we were doing the Hello 2030 campaign, which was really focused around the Sustainable Development Goals. And I'd say that was probably my favorite campaign, not only because I got the chance to take on a leadership role with it within my chapter, but I think that I found the Sustainable Development Goals to be because they're so broad, because they're so holistic, because they capture kind of all of the ideals we have for ourselves as human beings and for our planet. It's really a great umbrella to unify people with, especially when you're trying to get them onto this cause of global development. And so I found myself different parts of campus, different residences, different parts of downtown Toronto with a giant sign that said Hello 2030 and a bunch of different material stickers and everything like that, trying to stop people along the street, asking them, what sustainable development goal do you care about? Realizing that many people didn't know what the sustainable development goals were, and explaining that to them, and kind of seeing the understanding seep into their faces. And you know, you learn to face a lot of rejection when you're on the streets canvassing for a particular issue, especially when you're in the middle of downtown Toronto at the Eaton Centre. But you know, the conversations that you do have and the successful conversations that you do have are very, very impactful and very empowering. And I think that year I became known on the sustainable development goal guy within U of T engineering, just by how much I was talking to people about it. But I think that really, I really enjoyed that campaign because, again, the creativity around EWB's campaigns, I think, is something that's unique that you don't really see in too many organizations. And I think the ability it has not only to create impact on a policy space and kind of get the attention of our members of parliament, but also to kind of unite people under our common ideals, even people who might not have thought that they held those views in the first place. And so I think the final point that I want to add around kind of policy and advocacy is just the points that Addie mentioned around Hill Day, just like to emphasize how much, not only the impact that they have in a policy sphere, but how the impact that they have on the individual. Addie mentioned being terrified of kind of going to speak to an MP and now having the confidence. I was in a very, very similar boat, but you know, kind of my journey throughout EWB has led me to a point to feel more confident in these issues, not only, you know, my ability to articulate them, but also to have conversations with you know, people as high as our elected officials, to the point that last week when we were having a practice call for this session, Casey was able to just ask me out of the blue to hop onto a call with an MP later that afternoon for our Ask This Year, an ask which I was completely unaware of or not really involved with. And so just, you know, my involvement before gave me the confidence to be able to go put on a nice shirt, read through the brief, and jump in full-heartedly into that call. And you know, I don't think I would have been able to do that a year or two ago. Not only kind of in the confidence to speak to an MP, but also just kind of my knowledge on these particular issues. And I think advocacy has a specific role in doing that, because when you're put in that pressure, when you put in that spot to not only speak to an MP, but speak to constituents, speak to people in your neighborhood about them, you have to know what you're talking about. And so it really does a benefit to me and to the individual in that way as well.
Nice. Yeah, it's funny, you two actually highlighted my two favorite campaigns. So Be Adventurous I loved how much creativity there was around that. Like chapters really got to shine and have fun with that campaign. And I also think that the policy that we were hoping to see pushed forward with that campaign was so well thought out. I mean, the amount of research that the teams do into staying relevant and impactful is wild. And then I liked the Hello 2030 campaign because it really, there was similar levels of creativity or boldness, maybe is a better word, needed for that campaign. But it also invited the public in a way that we hadn't done in previous campaigns. So, you could advocate as an EWB or as a Canadian. And it was really as much an educational campaign as it was an active policy pushing campaign. So yeah, you two nailed it. And for anybody, any current members that are ever considering joining Day of Action but are nervous about it, I think these two spoke really beautifully about the impact it has. It's really an amazing experience. If we ever get to go back, hopefully we get there.
It seems like we've been doing a great job doing it virtually, though.
Yeah.
If we can go to the hill, we'll bring the hill to us.
And there's a lot of construction going on right now too, so maybe for the best.
There you go. Yeah, we'll sit in our chairs and do it like that. So we'll move on to the next point. I think we've got two more.
I think there's a really important question that I saw in the Q&A that I think Addie has to answer. And that, Addie, how much do you enjoy looking sharp Hill Day? A lot or immensely?
Oh, okay. I don't know who put that in. Thank you. I would say immensely. No.
Obviously. I think we all knew what the answer was, but we just needed to have it on record. For those of you who don't know Addie, all you need to do is look at any, pictures we have of Hill Day. Addie's always the best dressed person on the hill.
You're too kind. Thank you.
That's a good aside.
This whole thing I threw together. No, kidding.
So discussion point 3 is with the constant context and security shifting happening not only in our sector but across sectors around the world, a high degree of flexibility and adaptability is demanded to stay relevant and impactful. Based on your experience with EWB, do you think we're up to the challenge? Do you think this is something we can continue to do? So Addie, do you want to give that one a go?
Yes. My answer is yes. I think there's a two-part answer to this. First one is critically thinking. I think it's all got to do with people critically thinking, questioning things, and really playing their part in the political process as well. So I know we all go to university to pursue our careers, to learn technical knowledge, but I find the real purpose of going to post-secondary is actually to critically think, right? Question things, do your research, right? Does it make sense? I just feel like generally too many people rely on others for that expertise, right? And as soon as we start getting more people to think more critically, to take on that responsibility, right? Just to question things and actually do their research, we're kind of there for step one, because that's actually, kind of being the change you want to see in the world. Because we're like, oh, I want people to say more truths. I want people to stop lying. Well, why don't you start fact checking? Why don't you start holding people accountable? Why don't you start critically thinking? Does this make sense? That's step one. No more Facebook news, okay? Just like, remember how we weren't allowed to use Wikipedia as our source, kind of think of like that, right? So I think that's step one. And step two is kind of realizing that the world, I don't want to say the world is unfair, but realizing the systems that really govern us. So where do our leverage points lie? I think the first one is realizing that, especially here, we live in a capitalist society and economy, right? So that is how our economy runs, and that's how our society runs. So invest in businesses that are promoting the environment, doing fair trade, and have all these good policies. Invest in buy from the mom and pop shops, whatever it is. So play your part in there, and same with society. And the second bigger part, I would say, is to realize that the law governs us, right? That's something I think we tend to forget, that everything that we do we can do it because it's legal, right? It's our democracy. That's how it works. So when you realize that, start playing your role in it, right? Number one, vote. Like, it's so easy, right? I read the other day on LinkedIn, and it was that, oh, I wish Jacinda needs to leave New Zealand and come run our country. And someone commented that, no, she doesn't. There are millions of Jacindas in our democracy. Elect them, right? So really putting that into perspective. So start electing good leaders, right? Really go out and vote. There are too many people that think, oh, I'm just one vote. How does it matter? How does it count? But there's so many people thinking that it's like a huge majority. When I look at the numbers, I'm like, the amount of ease that the government has put in to make, for example, advanced polling happen, right? Like I think on the day of you have to go to your assigned, but before that you can go anywhere and vote and things like that. So why aren't you taking advantage of it? Because all you're gonna do is just go complain after the person you didn't want elected is elected, right? So elect good leaders, hold them accountable, and never stop pushing for good legislation. And that kind of ties back in with what I found with Day of Action, right? I always was the person, I'm like, oh, like, I wish we had better laws, or I wish this was legal, or, you know, how come this isn't legal, or why are there laws around this, right? And things happen because good people elect good leaders, and then they hold them accountable, and they never stop pushing for good legislation. You know, to put things in perspective, like women weren't allowed to vote at one point, right? Like that was the law. And then it changed. And there are so many other things like that that are good today that happened because people elected good leaders, they held them accountable, and they never stopped pushing for good legislation. So I think if you put those kind of two together, and then finally, I touched on this before, more young people need to be part of this, because they are the future. Right? The younger the person is, and the more excited they are about playing their part in this process, I think the more guaranteed we have of the security that you're talking about, right? We worry about it, but it's really all in our hands. So more people need to get involved. More people really need to realize that systems that govern us, and we need to, you know, like, we need to play by those rules and actually come out of as winners. And it's not like it's impossible. Just like I said, like, you know, if you look back in the 60s, the 50s, like, look at the political landscape and where it is today. That didn't happen by magic, right? People held elected officials accountable. They pushed for what they thought was right, and they got that change. Similarly, like, we went to Day of Action. We wanted our foreign policy to be better. We pushed for it, and we got it. So yeah, I think it's a two-step process where people need to themselves be like the key players. You got to think critically and do your fact checking and just question things, right? It's so easy. Like, does that make sense? And go on there to realizing that these are the systems that govern us. These are the systems we're in. So how can I play my part and actually, you know, go through my full potential to make sure that I contribute to bettering the world? And it's not that hard, you know? So that's my answer.
Yeah, and I think EWB, we strive to create a space where our members can practice and hone those two skills and be those 100%. Types of citizens. Yeah, I get that. I feel that. And David, what about you? Do you think we're up for the challenge?
I just want to tack on to Addie's answer really quickly, because I think, you know, you're describing the types of people that we need to adapt to this changing world and to kind of push the world in the right direction. And I feel like, I don't know, the people I feel like EWB attracts those types of people, and in many ways EWB helps to create those types of people as well. The type of people you describe, I can, as you're describing it, I can think of so many people I've met throughout my time in this organization who kind of fit that bill, you know, yourself and Casey included, kind of people who are pushing action and and kind of encouraging others and empowering others to do the same as well. And so I think that fits within kind of the ethos of this organization. To answer your question, Casey, I'd say yes as well. And I think, you know, there's so much evidence of my time within the organization that shows just how flexible and how adaptable we are. And I think that's just like a function of the team that we have and the people we have in this organization. And I think being, you know, this changing landscape affects everyone, but I think being a not-for-profit, we're especially susceptible to that change, and we're especially vulnerable to kind of the changes that these to the risks that these changes bring. And I think being a mission-driven organization and being one who's driven by our ideals and who's driven by a mission of alleviating poverty and kind of creating inequality and allowing breaking down the barriers that prevent people from achieving their full potential. I think that's a very long-term goal that may not even be achieved in our lifetimes. But I think that just makes it even more challenging when it comes down to having to adapt. But I think to give an example, I think this COVID-19 pandemic is kind of a perfect example of how everyone has had to adapt everything that they're doing. But I guess being an organization that works both locally and internationally, we've been very, very hard hit and affected by it. But I think, especially from my vantage point on the board, just being able to kind of be at the table to kind of have to figure out, okay, how are we adapting and how are we figuring these stuff out, and what's our strategy to kind of come out of this pandemic, the other side, still as a whole organization. Seeing things like the came up from the need to still adapt our fellowship program to the COVID context, recognizing that we still have organizations that would love to have Canadian talent. We still have Canadians who would love to lend their expertise and their knowledge to social enterprises in East and West Africa. How can we bring those two together? And I think the virtual talent exchange was just a beautiful adaptation to meet that need while still fitting in the context of COVID. We're talking about Day of Action. I myself was wondering whether or not Day of Action was going to happen, and kind of what I was wondering. So I was very happy to hear when we talked last week that, over the past couple of months, we've still been, calling MPs and having virtual meetings with them, and talking to you about hearing how it's so much harder to get to lock down an MP over Zoom as opposed to on Hill Day, when you have all the meetings scheduled for one day and you just kind of go in and get your work done. Now schedules are changing, and it's so much easier to cancel on someone when it's a Zoom call as opposed to a meeting in person. But we've been persistent and got those asks in and got all those meetings in. Being particularly close to the chapter network, seeing the amazing work that Justin and Geneva are doing, working with all the chapters, and all the amazing work our chapter presidents and our chapter leaders are doing to adapt our programming to the uncertainty of the upcoming school year. Some university campuses being fully online, some being in person, but then of course there are restrictions to the amount that you can do in person, and the amount of group gatherings that you can have severely limits the amount of activities that we can do on campus. But we're still pushing forward. We're still making sure that we can continue our activities, can continue to spread our message, can continue to have impact despite all the challenges that are thrown our way. And COVID-19 is the big one of this year of 2020, but I think it's just kind of a big example of all of the small ways in which EWB is able to adapt to the times, and all the ways we have adapted to the times over the years.
Yeah, I have to agree with the two of you, and I think additionally, and I'm actually going to combine our adaptability to the current shifting with the next question, which is, if there was one thing I wanted people to learn about EWB and other charitable organizations, what would it be? So my answer gets to both aspects of that. I think in terms of our adaptability to the current shifting, it's really about pulling everybody in. There isn't a single person or a single group that's making all of these decisions for the chapters or for the stakeholders or what have you. We have to work as a team if we want to shift quickly and make sure that we're representing people as best as we can. It's a team effort, and I think because the organization is constantly reflecting and taking the criticisms and the ideas of the whole entity as best as we can, it does give us this adaptability. And how that speaks to the second question, which is, it's the one thing I would want people to take away from a discussion about charitable organizations, is that not only does that feedback and team effort give us adaptability, but it's crucial to how we operate as an organization. It's not always easy to incorporate a lot of this feedback, but in the field that we're in, I mean, we've seen recently there are a lot of ways to misstep. And I think, you know, the question of are we a volunteerism group comes up, and we really reflect. Like, I don't think that question gets brushed off often. It's something that we have to look critically at. So I think by inviting these conversations within our community and in our national office, we are able to adapt quickly because we see some of these things coming from a mile away. COVID-19, obviously, we did not see that one coming. But yeah, I think it's also, you know, it opens us up. It makes us very vulnerable when we do take that stance. So I think if people know that, you know, we're going to make mistakes, and if they help call us out on some of those things, then we'll make adjustments and do it better next time, and we'll be able to pivot and change. For you too, David, if you want to start, what's something that you, if you could share one thing about EWB or charitable organizations, what would it be?
I think by the nature of the space that we work in, and by the nature of the challenges that we're trying to address, it's hard. I think that's, you know, and hard,
Yeah.
hard is an understatement. I think I feel like sometimes, especially, you know, maybe more so when you're working in national office, maybe when you're trying to tackle such big issues, you feel like you have the weight of the world on your shoulders. You feel like you are responsible for solving these issues, and it can be very, very challenging. As much as, you know, I think Addie was mentioning at the beginning how we are a passion-driven organization, how we have a lot of energy and enthusiasm towards tackling these issues. It does get difficult, and it does get draining at times, especially when you're when it does feel like you are responsible for addressing all of these issues. And I think it's a challenge, but I think that it's important to recognize that, and to recognize that that's not the case. And I feel like a huge role of being a charitable organization is not only to address these issues ourselves, but also to inform the public of these issues and get them on our side, and kind of change the public opinion on these issues, and kind of create an army of people who are on our side and kind of agree with the ideals that we're pushing, and kind of want to see the change that we're pushing for as well. And I think I want to tie in a kind of response to another question that I saw in the Q&A of what does it take to become a chapter member, or I'll interpret that as like, what does it take to be involved in an organization like EWB? And I think it really takes a willingness, a choice, a decision to tackle these issues, a decision to not be okay with the world as it is today, and a decision to take action on that. And I think really, if you have the willingness, the desire, and the drive to kind of work on this space and tackle these issues, recognizing that it's not going to be, you know, simple cookie cutter solutions, that it might be challenging and it's going to be complex, that's really all you need. Because I think when you come in with that attitude, when you come in with that spirit, there are going to be so many people within the organization who are going to give you the skills that you need, who are going to give you the knowledge that you need, who are going to build you up to the point where you are able and equipped to then start making change in a way that you best see fit. I feel like if you wait until you feel like, oh, I'm not an expert in this, or I don't know what I'm doing, or I don't feel like I'm the right person for this, then you're going to be paralyzed to the point where you're never going to take action. And I feel like if I think maybe I can speak for all of us. So I say if we all had that attitude, we might not have joined EWB at the beginning, because I don't think any of us felt equipped to kind of tackle these big issues when we first joined EWB, and maybe even now we might not even feel equipped to take on these issues because they are so big. But I think the space that we're working in calls for people to take on these issues, and the more, if you have even an inkling that this is something that you want to do, join the cause, and you know, there are many of us here who will help you along the way to find your journey and how you can make impact.
Nice. And what about you, Addie? If there was one thing that you could get across?
It's really hard to just say one thing because there's so many great things. But I want to, I really like what David had to say, and what you had to say too. And it's really talking about that space, that brave space that I was talking about earlier, right? EWB being the stepping stone. I sat down with Erin Bird of Calgary, and she runs Fair Trade Calgary here, and we were chatting, and she said that changing the world is supposed to be like, it's inconvenient. It really is, right? And it's supposed to be uncomfortable, and it's supposed to be a lot of, it's going to take some work. And so it's important that we're okay with this inconvenience, that we're okay that like, make that your normal. And I think we're afraid, it's human nature kind of to be afraid of stepping into that uncomfortable zone, right? But that uncomfortable area is where that magic, that growth happens. And when you realize that there are organizations like EWB and this charitable sector where so many people are doing things in their uncomfortable zone, I mean, the entire sector is this uncomfortable zone, I would say, right? You start to realize that, you know, you're really not alone. And you have so many resources, you have so much support, and you have so much passion that matches these incredible people that are working in this area, right? And there are so many causes, right? Because the world needs so much change. That there really is a world out there that awaits you. So when you ask me to say one thing that, you know, EWB or this sector has, I think the first thing I want to say is that EWB does not build wells in schools. So that's the first thing I'd say, because I think whenever I say engineers with that word, it's like, oh, you guys go build wells in schools, and we're like, no, we don't. So I think that's what's really unique about our organization that people should know about. It's that mindset that EWB creates, that brave space. But what's so magical about that space, and why I would encourage everyone to, you know, reach out to any local organization that's in the charitable sector and just get involved, is because it helps you become a leader. It helps you think differently, and it really shows you a lot about the world, to be a global citizen, to be a global thinker. And it's not, and here's the great part, is that I think there's a conception that when you step into this world is when you put on that hat and you work to solve these problems. And then when you leave your volunteering shift, or when you leave that Zoom call or whatever it is that you're doing, or your placement, you come back to the real world, and, you know, then you go to your 9 to 5 and whatever. But the reality is that it's actually a hat that stays on forever. And it's a beautiful thing, because I think, you know, one of the first things I learned about EWB was, you know, we think about, as engineers, we think about, you know, the bridge that we're building, but we don't think about the two communities that we're connecting through that bridge, right? And once you start thinking like that with everything that you do, you become such a more capable and better person in any work that you do, right? So ever since I've entered that EWB mindset, and any EWB that I've come across, we've chatted about that commonality that we have, that we were in this space that made us think, you know, we were in that brave space that allowed us to connect to that higher potential, or whatever you want to call it. And now we apply it in our work, we apply it in our personal lives, we apply it everywhere we go. And I think anyone that has yet to, you know, step into this sphere, like, you know, I will push you into it if you want me to, right? Like, I don't encourage you, like, you must, because I think it's such a great avenue through which you can better your thinking, your leadership, your just contribution to making the world a better place, right? That is how you're going to, I think, be the change that you want to see in the world. And as soon as you get in there, you'll find there's a network of passionate people, amazing people all over the world that are doing such great work. So you're really not alone. And suddenly that uncomfortable zone becomes very comfortable, and you realize that, you know, this is where the magic happens. So, you know, if you had one thing to say, that's what it would be. And go out there, get involved in any way, shape, or form, and let me know if you want me to push you, because I will.
Well, on that note, we have just one question from the community. David, you got to it a bit, becoming a chapter member. So Addie, you said you'd push them into the community. But I'd just like to say that it's pretty easy. If it's like a more technical question, reach out. National office has this network harnessed, and, you know, it's coast to coast to coast, as Trudeau likes to say. And there are chapters, and if there's not a chapter in your area, we can help you get started in another way, or connected alternatively. So reach out to national office, and we'll get you set up. We'll take care of you, and then the community will support you through it. They always do. I don't know if Leanna joined the call, but I think we're going to have to wrap up. But I do just want to say a closing statement. I want to give thanks to our panelists, Adi Chaudhary and David Baroto. I am Casey Fander. And also to the participants, our audience, for joining us today. I hope we were able to convey the numerous ways that EWB can impact young Canadians and set them up for future success. I can say with complete confidence that I learned skills through this community that have really set me up for a path of impact, and that's something I wouldn't trade for the world. Speaking of impact, I'm just going to plug our Canada Cares campaign. Check out the link. It was just posted in the chat box, and send a letter to our Minister of International Development, Karina Gould, to make sure that Canada is participating in the global fight against COVID. So, we've spoken about some of the impact we do, and now I invite you to lend your voice and help this community really get our message across of more and better Canadian aid. So thank you again to Adi and David for participating, and to the audience for tuning in. 12:01, we made it. So
I just want to say as well, if anyone had any questions that didn't get to be answered, we feel free to send them our way. We'd love to answer them. I'm sure each of us love talking about EWB in our time with EWB. So always feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Ones that you asked that may not have been answered, or any ones that came up at the end that you just really want to ask.
Yeah, there were some submitted questions. So reach out to us. We would love to speak a bit more about this. We're available.
Thanks everyone for tuning in. This was a blast. I loved seeing you guys, and looking forward to continuing the good fight.
Great. Thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you next time.
Bye, everyone.